Hate was a prayer Serena Jane Mayfield said every morning, whispered into the thin, dusty air of the Arizona Territory. It was a prayer with one name, Apache. She tasted it in the brackish water. From her well saw it in the shimmering heat that warped the distant mesas, and felt it in the profound, aching silence where her family's laughter used to be. The name was a curse, a brand on her soul. She believed the only good Apache was a dead one, a sentiment carved into her heart by the fire and blood of a single horrific night. She would have sooner trusted a rattlesnake than one of the people, and she would hold that belief right up to the moment the world went black, and the only thing that could save her was the sound of an Apache warrior whispering her name in the dark. The year of our Lord 1883 found Serena Jane Mayfield living in a house of ghosts. It wasn't spirits in the traditional sense, but the powerful lingering echoes of a life torn away. The main house, built of solid adobe brick by her father, Samuel Mayfield, stood as a lonely monument on the parched plains of the San Pedro Valley. Every creak of the floorboards was her mother Martha humming a hymn. Every glint of sun off the window pane was her younger brother Thomas chasing dust devils in the yard. They were gone. 3 years gone, victims of a Chiricahua raid that had swept through their homestead like a flash flood, leaving nothing but ruin and a single traumatized survivor. Serena Jane, then 16, had survived by hiding in the cramped, musty root cellar, listening to the screams that would become the soundtrack to her nightmares. When she'd finally emerged, the world she knew was ash and silence. Now at 19, she was as hard and unyielding as the land itself. Her blonde hair, once soft and bright, was perpetually tied back in a severe knot, often grimy with dust. Her blue eyes, which once held the boundless optimism of youth, were now narrowed and watchful, constantly scanning the horizon. She ran the Mayfield Ranch, or what was left of it, with a singular burning purpose to defy the savagery that had tried to erase her. She kept a dozen head of hardy longhorns, tended a small vegetable patch, and knew how to use the Winchester 73, propped by her door, better than most men knew how to use a fork. Her closest neighbor, if you could call him, that was Jedediah Stone, an old, grizzled ranch hand who had worked for her father for 20 years. His own small claim was a mile down the creek, and he rode over 3 times a week to help with the heavy work, his loyalty to the Mayfield name as solid as the Dragoon Mountains to the east. "You ought to sell Serena Jane." He'd grumble, his voice a gravelly rasp. "This ain't no life for a young woman alone. That Silas Kane would pay you a fair price." Serena Jane would just tighten her lips. "This is Mayfield land, Jed. They'll carry me out of here in a pine box before I sell it." Silas Kane was the shadow that loomed over the entire valley. A wealthy cattle baron from back east, he had arrived 2 years prior, with a seemingly endless supply of cash and an insatiable appetite for land. He bought out ranchers who were struggling, intimidated those who were stubborn, and controlled the only mercantile of any size for 50 miles. His Barkay Ranch was a sprawling empire that was slowly strangling the life out of independent homesteaders like Serena Jane. Kane had approached her twice. The first time he'd been condescendingly sympathetic, a fat spider offering to protect a fly. "A terrible tragedy, Miss Mayfield. Truly. This land holds painful memories. Allow me to take it off your hands, give you a fresh start, somewhere civilized." She had refused, her voice cold as a winter morning. The second time, his thin smile didn't reach his predatory eyes. "My offer stands, but not forever. This is a hard country. It has a way of swallowing up people who don't know their place." The threat was veiled but clear. It was after that second visit that the sightings began. She would be mending a fence line or hauling water, and a flicker of movement on the high mesas would catch her eye. A lone rider, still as a statue watching. He was too far to make out details, but he was not a cowboy. The silhouette was wrong. He sat his pony with a natural grace, bareback, a rifle held across his lap. An Apache. The first time she saw him, cold dread mixed with white-hot fury coursed through her veins. She ran for her Winchester, her heart hammering against her ribs. By the time she returned, levering a round into the chamber and raising the stock to her shoulder, he was gone. Vanished, as if the heat haze had simply imagined him. It happened again, a week later, and then again. He never came closer, never made a threatening move. He just watched. The town of Benson, a dusty collection of buildings that served as the local hub, was rife with rumors of renegades, leaving the San Carlos reservation, small bands of Chiricahua warriors who refused to be penned in. Geronimo's name was a curse on the lips of every white settler. To Serena Jane, this silent watcher was one of them. He was the embodiment of the terror that had shaped her. One sweltering afternoon, while replacing a rotted post near the creek bed, she saw him again. He was closer this time, perched on a rocky outcrop not a quarter-mile away. The setting sun glinted off something on his person, perhaps a silver concho or the barrel of his rifle. This time she didn't run. Her hands, calloused and strong, gripped the post she was holding. All the grief, all the fear, all the burning rage of the last 3 years coalesced into a single venomous point. She straightened up her small frame, rigid with defiance, and stared directly at the distant figure. She didn't have her rifle, but she had her voice. "You hear me?" She screamed, her voice raw and cracking in the dry air. "I see you, you murdering heathen. You think watching me will scare me off. You took my family. You took everything. But you won't take this. I curse your name. I curse your people. May you all burn in the hell you've made for me." Her shouts echoed in the canyon, a lonely, desperate sound. The figure remained motionless for a long moment. Then, with a fluid movement, he turned his pony and melted back into the shadows of the rocks. Serena Jane stood there, breathing heavily, tears of rage and sorrow finally streaking paths through the grime on her cheeks. She had stared into the face of her demon and cursed him. She felt a small, bitter satisfaction. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind whistling through the eaves sounded like whispers. Every shadow thrown by the flickering lamplight seemed to take on a sinister shape. She sat in her father's rocking chair, the Winchester, across her lap, her ears straining to catch any sound over the frantic beating of her own heart. She had thrown down a gauntlet, and in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Arizona Territory, she knew that such challenges were always answered. She just didn't know that the answer would come from a direction she never expected, or that the name she had cursed would one day be the only one she prayed to hear. The weeks following Serena Jane's outburst settled into a tense, watchful quiet. The silent Apache rider was gone, or at least she no longer saw him. The mesas stood empty against the piercing blue sky, their silence more unnerving than his presence had been. An unspoken question hung in the air. Had she scared him off, or was he simply biding his time? Jedediah Stone believed the former. "He saw you ain't no wilting flower girl," Jed said expertly, twisting wire around a fence post. "Probably went off to find easier pickings. Still, you oughtn't to be hollering at ghosts. It ain't safe." "He wasn't a ghost, Jed. He was real." She insisted, her gaze drifting back to the high ground. "Might as well be. They come and go like the wind. Best not to pay them any mind." But paying them no mind was impossible. The fear of the Apache was a tool, and Silas Kane was a master craftsman. He began to use it with surgical precision. The next time he rode out to her ranch, he wasn't alone. He had Deputy Miller with him, a young, impressionable man who wore his badge like it was a suit of armor. Miss Mayfield Kane began his tone, dripping with false concern, as he reined in his expensive black stallion. Sheriff Brody asked the deputy and me to check on the outlying homesteads. There's been talk. A family over by the Whetstones found their stock scattered. Another report of a camp spotted up near the Cienega. Deputy Miller nodded eagerly. That's right, Mum. We think it's a small band, maybe half a dozen bucks, broke off from the reservation. Sheriff says everyone should be on high alert. Serena Jane's eyes narrowed. I can take care of myself, Mr. Kane. Kane's gaze swept over her small, dusty ranch, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. With all due respect, a lone woman is a prime target. My offer to buy you out is still on the table. It's a matter of safety now. I could have a dozen of my men here, fortify this place as an outpost for the Bar K. You'd be safe in town with a handsome sum in your pocket. The answer is still no. Her voice was flat, final. Kane sighed dramatically. Have it your way. But when trouble comes, don't say you weren't warned. He and the deputy turned and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and unease in their wake. The trouble started 3 days later. It was small at first, insidious. She woke one morning to find the top rail of her corral fence cleanly cut through her 2 horses, having wandered off into the brush. It took her half the day under the brutal sun to track them down. She blamed the Apache. The cut was too clean for a wild animal. A week after that, she went to the well to find the water tainted, fouled with a dead jackrabbit that had been deliberately thrown in. The stench was sickening. She had to spend 2 days hauling water from the creek, a back-breaking task, while she cleaned and bleached the well. Again, she pictured a shadowy figure, his face painted for war, poisoning her water supply in the dead of night. Her hatred, which had been a simmering coal, was fanned back into a low flame. Jed was suspicious. That cut on the fence rail. It was made with a saw Serena Jane, not a knife or a hatchet. And that rabbit. An Apache would have eaten it, not wasted it. You're making excuses for them. She snapped, her patience worn thin by exhaustion and fear. Who else could it be? Someone who wants you gone, he muttered, looking pointedly in the direction of Kane's vast ranch. But Serena Jane couldn't see it. Her grief had created a blind spot, a single all-consuming explanation for every misfortune the Apache. It was easier to blame the faceless terror from her past than to confront the smiling, civilized evil in her present. The whispers in the town of Benson grew louder. When she rode in for supplies, she was met with a mixture of pity and resentment. Still holding out, Mayfield sneered one of Kane's men, a surly cowboy named Pike, as he loitered outside the mercantile. You're endangering the whole valley by staying out there. A lone homestead is an open invitation for a raid. Martha Stewart, the sheriff's wife, and the town's chief gossip pulled her aside with a worried expression. Serena Jane, dear people are frightened. Sheriff Brody is doing his best, but he's only one man. Silas Kane has offered to organize a militia to protect us all. You should consider his generosity. Every conversation seemed to steer back to Silas Kane, painting him as the savior of the valley and her as the stubborn fool who was putting everyone at risk. The pressure was immense, a psychological siege that was just as draining as any physical threat. Her isolation deepened. The friendly nods she used to receive were replaced by wary glances. She was no longer just the Mayfield girl who survived the massacre. She was the Mayfield girl who was inviting another one. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple, She was sitting on her porch cleaning her Winchester. The world was quiet, save for the chirp of crickets. And then she saw him again. For the first time in weeks, the watcher was back on the mesa. He was just a silhouette against the fading light, still and patient. All her frustration, her fear, and the town's condemnation boiled over. It was his fault, his people's fault. His presence was the justification for Cain's threats and the town's fear. She didn't shout this time. She just raised the rifle, the smooth, oiled stock cool against her cheek. She sighted down the long barrel, centering the distant figure in the V-notch of the rear sight. He was well out of range, a fact she knew with a grim certainty. But the act was a release. It was a promise. She held him in her sights for a full minute, her finger resting on the trigger. In her mind, she saw not a man, but the monster from her nightmares. The one who had stolen her family. The one who was now trying to steal her home. The figure on the mesa raised a hand. It wasn't a wave or a threat. It seemed more like an acknowledgement. Then, as before, he turned and disappeared. Serena Jane lowered the rifle, her arms trembling. The siege was tightening. She felt like a lone tree in a vast, empty plain, waiting for the lightning to strike. She was so focused on the storm gathering on the horizon that she failed to see the serpent coiling at her feet. The serpent struck on a moonless night a week later. The air was thick and still, trapping the day's heat close to the ground. Jedediah had stayed late, helping Serena Jane rehang a heavy barn door that had come off its iron hinges. They had finished their work by lantern light, sharing a simple meal of beans and stale bread on the porch. Something's not right in the air, Jed had said, his old eyes scanning the impenetrable darkness that surrounded their small bubble of light. The coyotes are quiet. Too quiet. Serena Jane had felt it too, a prickling on her skin, a tension in the silence. She'd chalked it up to nerves her mind, still replaying the sight of the watcher on the mesa. "You're just getting spooked in your old age, Jed." He had just grunted, drained his coffee cup, and mounted his weary-looking horse. "You bar that door good and tight. And keep that Winchester handy. Always do," she'd replied. She watched him ride off his figure, quickly swallowed by the night. After securing the house, she sat in her father's chair, the familiar weight of the rifle, a cold comfort on her lap. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. The silence pressed in, amplifying every small sound, the groan of the house, settling the scuttling of a mouse in the walls. The first sign of trouble was a frantic whinny from her horse, Dusty, in the barn. It wasn't a sound of simple restlessness. It was sharp, high-pitched terror. Serena Jane was on her feet in an instant, her heart leaping into her throat. She moved to the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. She saw a flicker of orange dance against the side of the barn, then another. A torch. Then she saw the shapes of men, at least 3 of them, moving with a furtive quickness. They were dressed in dark, rough clothing, their faces obscured by shadow and low-brimmed hats. One of them splashed a liquid from a can onto the dry timber walls of the barn. Kerosene. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a stealthy Apache raid. This was an arsonist's work. Before she could even process a plan, the torch was thrown. The kerosene-soaked wall erupted in a sudden whoosh of flame, the light instantly and horrifically illuminating the entire yard. The fire climbed the dry wood with an eager, crackling hunger. Her horses screamed from inside. Panic warred with fury. She had to save the horses. She unbarred the door and burst onto the porch, leveling the Winchester. "Get away from my barn!" she screamed, her voice tight with rage. One of the men turned, surprised by her sudden appearance. He raised a pistol and fired the shot, deafening in the night. The bullet splintered the porch post right next to her head, showering her with wood chips. Instinct took over. She fired back the rifle, kicking hard against her shoulder. The man grunted and stumbled back, clutching his arm before disappearing into the darkness with his accomplices. But they had done their work. The fire was raging, devouring the barn. Black smoke billowed into the night sky, carrying with it the scent of burning hay and terror. Suddenly, a rider charged into the firelight from the direction of the creek. It was Jed. He must have heard the shot and turned back. Jed knew Serena Jane screamed. But the old man wasn't listening. His face was a mask of fury. With a battle cry that was more of a raw-throated roar, he spurred his horse toward the burning barn, pulling the old Colt revolver he always carried. He was going for the horses. He reached the barn door, just as a section of the hayloft engulfed in flames collapsed inward with a deafening crash. The explosion of sparks and burning debris spooked his horse, which reared violently. Jed, caught off guard, was thrown hard to the ground. He landed with a sickening thud and lay still. Jed, forgetting the attackers, forgetting everything but the old man lying motionless on the ground, Serena Jane ran. She reached his side and knelt, the heat from the fire scorching her face. He was unconscious, a nasty gash on his temple, already welling with blood. The barn was a lost cause now, a roaring inferno. The agonized cries of the animals trapped inside were a sound that would be seared into her memory forever. She had to get him away. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she hooked her arms under his shoulders and began to drag him back toward the house. He was heavier than he looked, and every inch was a struggle. The ground was lit as bright as day by the blaze. She finally got him onto the porch and through the door, collapsing with a sob of exhaustion and despair. She barred the door again, her hands shaking so badly she could barely slide the heavy wooden beam into place. She tended to Jed's head wound as best she could, her hands sticky with his blood. The fire raged for another hour before it began to die down, leaving the smoldering skeletal frame of her barn against the night sky. The terrible silence returned, broken only by Jed's shallow breathing, and the popping and hissing of the dying embers. As dawn threatened to break painting, the eastern sky, a pale, sickly grey, Serena Jane forced herself to go outside. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke. The ruin of the barn was a gaping black wound on her land. Her horses were gone. Her winter supply of hay was gone. A part of her father's legacy had been turned to ash. She walked the perimeter of the disaster, her heart, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. And then she saw it. Near the spot where the arsonists had first appeared, preserved in a patch of soft dirt, were several boot prints. They were distinct, made by worn cowboy boots, with a telltale circular wear pattern on the heel. Then, a few feet away, something caught her eye. It was half buried in the dust, clearly dropped in the attacker's hasty retreat. She bent and picked it up. It was an arrowhead. She stared at it, her mind reeling. It was crudely made, the flint chipped unevenly, the sinew wrapping sloppy. It looked fake. It looked like something a white man thought an Apache arrowhead should look like. An Apache warrior's life depended on the quality of his tools. They would never use something so poorly crafted. She looked from the fake arrowhead in her hand to the distinct boot prints on the ground. Jed's words echoed in her mind. Someone who wants you gone. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that was far more terrifying than the one she had carried in her head for 3 years. The accidents, the whispers in town, Kane's perfectly timed offers, the men with their faces hidden, the planted evidence. The monster she had been fighting wasn't a ghost from the past. It wasn't a nameless, faceless Apache warrior on a distant mesa. It was a man with a name, and a face, a man who smiled while he plotted to destroy her. The Apache hadn't burned her barn. Silas Kane had. The realization didn't lessen her fear. It magnified it. She was no longer fighting a phantom. She was fighting an empire. And she was utterly, completely alone with an injured old man and the smoking ruins of her life. The sun rose, but for Serena Jane, the world had just grown infinitely darker. 2 days passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Jedediah drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing ragged, a fever setting in from the gash on his head. Serena Jane did what she could, cleaning the wound and forcing sips of water between his cracked lips. But she knew he needed a doctor. The town of Benson was a full day's ride, and she had no horse. To walk was to invite death either from the elements or from Cain's men, who she now knew were watching her. The isolation was suffocating. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching riders, every shadow a potential assassin. She slept in brief, fitful bursts, sitting in the chair with the Winchester across her lap, her senses on a razor's edge. The burned-out shell of the barn was a constant smoking reminder of her vulnerability. Cain had drawn first blood. She knew he wouldn't stop until he had finished the job. He couldn't afford to leave a witness. The third night was different. A storm was brewing in the mountains, the air heavy and electric. There was no moon, no stars, just a profound and absolute blackness that seemed to swallow sound itself. Inside the small adobe house, the only light came from a single, low-burning lantern that cast long dancing shadows on the walls. Jed was mumbling in a delirious sleep. Around what she guessed was midnight, Serena Jane heard it. A faint, rhythmic creak. At first she thought it was the house settling, but the sound was too regular. It was the sound of leather, of a saddle cinch, being tightened, of men trying and failing to be silent. Her heart seized. They were back. She crept to the window and peered through the sliver of a gap in the curtain. In the oppressive darkness, she could just make out 3 figures on horseback, dismounting by the dead cottonwood tree near the creek bed. They weren't carrying torches this time. They were moving with a grim, quiet purpose. This time they were coming for the house. They were coming for her. A wave of pure, cold terror washed over her. This was it. There was nowhere to run. The nearest help was miles away. It was just her 1 rifle and a handful of cartridges against 3 men. She backed away from the window, her breath catching in a sob. Her defiant stand, her stubborn pride, it had all led to this, to die alone in the dark, just like her family. She raised the Winchester, her knuckles white, and backed toward the corner of the room, trying to find a defensible position. The floorboards of the porch groaned softly. They were close. Her hands were slick with sweat. The metallic click of a pistol hammer being cocked sounded impossibly loud in the stillness. And then another sound. It was a whisper, low and urgent, so close it seemed to come from inside her own head. It came from the other side of the house, from the small window behind her father's chair. Serena Jane. She froze, every muscle in her body tensing. The voice was male, deep, with an accent she couldn't place, but it was not the rough drawl of a cowboy. It was softer, guttural. Her mind reeled. Was she imagining it? Was it a trick the men on the porch were now fumbling at the door, testing it, seeing it was barred? One of them swore under his breath. The whisper came again, more insistent, a breath against the very glass of the window pane. Serena Jane, they mean to burn you out. Come to the window, now. She turned slowly, her rifle still up, and stared at the dark square of the window. She could see nothing but her own terrified reflection in the glass. Who was out there? How did they know her name? A sharp thud came from the front of the house as one of the men shouldered the door, testing its strength. They were getting impatient. "Who's there?" She breathed, her voice barely audible. "There is no time." The voice whispered back. "The one you call Pike is with them. He plans to set the fire at the front while the others cover the back. You will be trapped. I can lead you away. The window latch. Open it." Pike. One of Cain's men. The one who had sneered at her in town. The voice knew his name. 1,000 conflicting thoughts warred in her mind. It could be a trap, another one of Cain's tricks, but the urgency in the voice, the specific details, it felt real. The men at the door were real. The threat of fire was real. Another heavy thud against the door, stronger this time. The wood groaned in protest. She had seconds to decide. Trust the devil she knew was at her door, or the devil she didn't, whispering from the darkness. She looked at Jed lying helpless on the cot. She couldn't fight them off and protect him. A frontal assault was suicide. With a surge of desperate, irrational hope, she made her choice. She crept to the small window, her rifle held in one hand, and with a trembling finger, she lifted the simple wooden latch. The window slid open with a faint squeak. A hand reached in not to grab her, but to help. It was dark-skinned, lean and strong. She flinched back. "Do not be afraid," the voice said, no longer a whisper, but a low, commanding rumble. "Give me your rifle." She hesitated for a heart-stopping second, then passed the Winchester through the window. It was her only defense, and she was handing it to a shadow. The hand took it, and then reappeared palm open. "Come, quickly. The creek bed offers cover." Another splintering crack from the front door. It wouldn't hold much longer. Taking a deep breath that felt like it was tearing her lungs, Serena Jane hitched up her skirt and scrambled through the small opening. She half fell, half jumped to the ground outside. The man caught her, his grip firm on her arm, steadying her. She was finally face to face with her savior. In the faint, ambient light that the storm clouds failed to completely block, she saw him. He was tall and lean, dressed in buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt. His black hair was long held back by a leather band. And his face? It was the face that had haunted her from the mesas. The high cheekbones, the aquiline nose, the dark, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through her. It was the Apache. Her mind short-circuited. Her legs went weak. The man she had cursed, the man she had aimed her rifle at, the embodiment of all her hatred and fear, was standing before her. And he was holding her rifle. He saw the look on her face, a mixture of terror and utter confusion. He gave her no time to react. "They will see the open window," he said, his English clipped but clear. He pressed the Winchester back into her hands. "We must go." Just then, the front door of the house finally gave way with a crash of splintered wood. Shouts erupted from inside. The Apache grabbed her hand. His touch was not rough, but it was insistent. He pulled her into the deeper shadows along the side of the house, his movements completely silent. He was a ghost in the darkness. He led her away from the house toward the sound of the gurgling creek, just as the first flicker of orange light appeared in the windows of her home. They had set the fire. She stumbled after him, her mind a screaming vortex of chaos. She cursed the Apache's name. But in the dead of night, with fire at her back and death at her door, it was an Apache who had called hers to save her. They moved like wraiths through the night, the Apache leading her with an uncanny sense of the terrain. He guided her not by sight, but by feel his hand, a firm pressure on her elbow, navigating the treacherous, rock-strewn creek bed with a silence she would have thought impossible. Behind them, the orange glow of her burning home painted the underside of the storm clouds, a second terrible sunrise in the middle of the night. The shouts of Cain's men faded, replaced by the rush of the wind and the pounding of her own blood in her ears. Her mind was still reeling, unable to reconcile the reality of the situation. This man, this Chiricahua warrior, was the savage she had fantasized about killing. Yet he had warned her, saved her. He had known her name. He had known Pike's name. The dissonance was so profound it made her physically dizzy. He led her to a small hidden alcove, a deep undercut in the canyon wall, shielded by a thick growth of mesquite and scrub oak. It was completely concealed from the open ground above. "We wait here," he said, his voice a low rumble. He released her arm, and the absence of his touch left her feeling strangely untethered. He moved to the edge of the brush, peering back toward the fire. Serena Jane sank to the ground, her legs finally giving out. The Winchester felt impossibly heavy in her lap. She looked at the man's back, at the straight, proud set of his shoulders. "Jed," she breathed the name, catching in her throat. "Jedediah, he's still in there." The horror of it washed over her, a fresh wave of grief and guilt. The Apache turned his head slightly. "The old man, they will find him. They will not harm him." "How do you know?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "They need a story," he said, simply turning to face her fully. In the dim reflected light from the fire, his features were stark, carved from stone. A story for the sheriff. The renegade Apache attack again. The brave Miss Mayfield fought back, but was lost in the fire. The old man is a witness to the attack. A live witness is better than a dead one. He will tell them he saw Indians. It is what he will believe. His logic was cold, brutal, and undeniably true. Kane wasn't just killing her. He was creating a narrative one that would solidify his position and justify his actions. Jed, delirious and terrified, would be the perfect unwitting pawn. "Who are you?" she finally asked, the question she'd been screaming in her mind. He watched her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "My name is Nache." Nache. The name meant nothing to her yet. It was the name of the man who had upended her entire world. Why, she asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you help me? Your people. You hate us." It was a statement of fact, the foundation upon which her life had been rebuilt. A flicker of something, pain, anger, sorrow crossed his face before the stoic mask returned. "My people are hungry. My people are hunted. We did not kill your family, Serena Jane. The men who did that were Mescalero raiders who answered to no chief, their hearts filled with whiskey and hate. They shamed the name of the people." She stared at him, speechless. She had never considered that there were distinctions, different bands, different codes. To her, an Apache was an Apache. "I have watched you," Nache continued, his voice low and even. "I watched you work this land alone. You have a strong heart, like the women of my own band. I watched the man Kane try to drive you out. When they poisoned your well, I saw the tracks of their boots. When they burned your barn, I found this." He reached into a small pouch at his belt and held something out to her. It was a brass cartridge casing, a 44-40, he said, for a Winchester rifle, like yours, the weapon of the white man, the fake arrowhead she had found, the boot prints. Now this. The evidence was irrefutable, a chain of proof that shackled Silas Kane to these crimes. "I watched you curse my name," he said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "You have a powerful voice, but your anger was aimed at a shadow. The true snake was in your own house." "Why, tell me now," she whispered. "Why not let them kill me? It would be one less white person on your land." "This is not my land anymore," he said, and for the first time his voice held a raw, bitter edge. "It is your land. And Kane, the Narklehe, as we call him, the White Devil, he wants the water. Your creek. It is the only water for miles that runs all year. He is building a dam high in the canyons. When it is finished, this creek will run dry. Your land will die. The land of the small ranchers will die, and he will buy it all for pennies. His attacks on you blaming my people, it makes the other settlers afraid. It makes them eager to sell to the one man who promises to protect them. The scope of Cain's plan was breathtakingly evil. It wasn't just about her small ranch, it was about the entire valley. And he was using the blood feud between the settlers and the Apache as his primary weapon. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackle of the distant fire and the rising wind of the coming storm. The reality of her situation settled upon Serena Jane, heavy as a burial shroud. Her home was gone. Jed was in the hands of her enemies. She was a fugitive on her own land, hunted and alone. No, not alone. She looked at Nachai. He was an outcast, a member of a hunted people, watching his world die, just as she was. Their enemy was the same. Their desperation was the same. In the flickering glow of the fire that had destroyed her past, a fragile, dangerous, and utterly necessary alliance was being forged. "What do we do?" She asked the question, acknowledging a "we" that had not existed an hour ago. Nachai looked at her, his expression serious. "First we survive the night, then we show the snake for what he is. But to do that, you must learn the ways of the shadow. You must learn to be the ghost they hunt." The first fat drops of rain began to fall, hissing on the hot ground. The storm was breaking. For Serena Jane Mayfield, a different kind of storm was just beginning, one that would either cleanse the valley or wash her away completely. And her only guide through the tempest was the man she had once sworn to kill. The storm broke with the fury of a vengeful god. Rain fell in solid, blinding sheets, turning the dry arroyos into raging torrents and washing away every track, every scent, every trace of their existence. Nachai had led her higher into the rocky foothills of the Dragoons, to a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of desert willow. It was barely a shelter, but it was dry. From their vantage point, they could see the valley below, a landscape of drowned shadows. The fire at her homestead was long extinguished, a memory already being scrubbed clean by the deluge. For days they lived like animals. Nachai taught her things she never knew were possible to learn. He showed her how to find water, not in the creeks, but trapped in the hollows of rocks, filtered and pure. He taught her which roots were edible, how to set snares for rabbits, so small and quiet they left almost no sign. He taught her how to move, placing her feet heel to toe, to minimize sound, using the contours of the land and the play of light and shadow to become invisible. She in turn told him everything she knew about Cain, about the town, about Sheriff Brody's methodical but slow-moving nature, about the layout of the Bar K Ranch headquarters. She was a quick study, her mind sharpened by desperation. The soft edges of the girl who had inherited a ranch were stripped away, revealing a core of hardened steel she never knew she possessed. Her hatred for the Apache, once the central pillar of her identity, had crumbled to dust, replaced by a grudging, then growing respect for the man beside her. She saw not a savage, but a survivor of immense skill and profound sorrow. He spoke of his people, of their traditions, of the sacredness of the land Cain was trying to steal, not just for its resources, but for its spirit. "He does not understand," Nachai said one evening, as they shared the meager warmth of a tiny, smokeless fire built deep in the cave. "He thinks land is a thing to be owned, to be broken. For the people we belong to the land. It is our mother. He is not just killing your ranch, he is poisoning our mother." A week after the fire, they risked a trip toward the valley floor. Nachai, moving with a ghost's tread, scouted the area near her ruined homestead. He returned with grim news. Your friend, the old one, he is in the town. Kane's men took him there. They told the sheriff it was my people who burned the house. They said you fought bravely, but were taken. Or killed. Brody has sent a patrol to the reservation to question the agent. He is looking in the wrong place. So Jed is safe, Serena Jane said, a wave of relief washing over her. For now, Nache cautioned, he is more useful to Kane alive. But his memory may return, the story may change. Kane will not let him live forever. They needed proof, hard, undeniable proof that would force Sheriff Brody's hand and turn the town against its self-appointed protector. Jed's testimony, even if he recovered fully, would be the word of a dazed old man against a wealthy cattle baron. They needed more. The damn Serena Jane said, the idea taking shape in her mind. You said he's building a dam. If we could prove that. It is high in the canyons, a hidden place. Many guards, Nache said. To go there is to be seen. What about his office, she pressed. At the ranch. Kane is a businessman from the east. Men like that are meticulous. They keep records, ledgers, plans, deeds. He must have the plans for the dam letters, something that proves what he's doing. Nache considered this. It was a different kind of warfare, one of paper and ink, but he understood the strategy. The ranch house is a fortress, men everywhere. But they won't be expecting an attack there, she argued. They think the threat is from the Apache out here in the wilderness. They think I'm dead. They'll be watching the perimeter, not the house itself. It was a perilous, almost suicidal plan. The Bar K headquarters was the heart of Kane's operation, crawling with loyal, well-armed cowboys. But it was also where the truth was hidden. They spent 2 days watching the ranch from a high, distant ridge using a small spyglass her father had owned, which he'd had the presence of mind to grab in a small satchel before fleeing. They mapped the guards' patrol routes, the layout of the buildings, the rhythm of daily life. They noted that on Saturday nights, a large portion of the men rode into Benson for liquor, and women leaving a skeleton crew behind. And they noted that Silas Kane always worked late in his office, on that night the single lamp burning in the west-facing window of the main house. The plan they devised was audacious. Nache would create a diversion to the east near the main horse corral, a fire or a stampede, something to draw the remaining guards away from the main house. In that window of chaos, Serena Jane, who knew the layout of a ranch house, would slip inside, find the office, and get the proof. You cannot do this alone. Nache stated, his jaw set. It is too dangerous. And you can't go in there, she countered, her voice firm. If they catch you, they'll kill you on sight, no questions asked. If they catch me, they might hesitate. They'll be shocked to see me alive. It might buy me a few seconds. And I know what I'm looking for. A ledger book, a map. I can find it faster. He stared at her, a fierce argument in his eyes, but he saw the unshakable resolve in hers. She was no longer the frightened girl he had led from a burning house. She was a warrior in her own right. Reluctantly, he agreed. Saturday night arrived, cloaked in a familiar, starless dark. They moved down from the hills, 2 shadows among many. Serena Jane's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and determination. She was armed with a hunting knife and her wits. Nache carried his rifle and a burning conviction. They reached the edge of the ranch. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. Be the wind, Serena Jane, quick and silent. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes intense. Do not die, he said softly. It was not an order, but a plea. Then he was gone, melting into the darkness toward the corrals. Serena Jane waited, counting the seconds, each one an eternity. She watched the light in Kane's office window. Then a sudden shout from the east. A flicker of orange erupted, followed by the terrified screaming of horses and the crack of gunfire. The diversion had begun. As predicted, 2 guards posted near the house cursed and ran toward the commotion. The lamp in Kane's window went out, and she saw his bulky silhouette move to the window to peer out at the chaos. This was her chance. Taking a deep breath, she sprinted from the shadows, keeping low to the ground. She reached the back of the house, her hands finding the latch of a pantry window they had identified earlier. It was unlocked. With a silent prayer, she slid it open and slipped inside, plunging into the belly of the beast. The house smelled of cigar smoke and whiskey. Serena Jane moved with a ghost's silence, finding the office with ease. There on the massive oak desk lay the prize, a thick leather-bound ledger. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed it, and as her fingers closed around the spine, the doorway filled with the hulking figure of Silas Kane, his face first frozen in disbelief, contorted with a venomous rage. "You're dead," he hissed. Mistakes were made. Serena Jane shot back, her voice shaking but defiant. Kane's eyes locked on the ledger. "Give that to me," he snarled, raising a small derringer. With a desperate cry, she hurled a heavy glass inkwell from the desk at him. It struck him in the chest, showering him with black ink. In that moment of surprise, she bolted. She burst out the back door and ran for the darkness of the creek bed, Kane's furious bellows echoing behind her. "She's alive, get her!" The yard erupted in chaos. Gunshots cracked the night air as his men scrambled to cut her off. She was exposed, a lone figure running under the vast, uncaring sky. She wasn't going to make it. Suddenly a rifle boomed from the cottonwoods. One of Kane's riders cried out and fell from his horse. Nache. At the same instant, a thunder of hoofbeats roared from the main road, accompanied by a sharp command. "Hold your fire." "This is Sheriff Brody." Lights and riders flooded the ranch yard. The posse had arrived with Jedediah Stone beside the sheriff, his face grim, caught between Nache's deadly aim and the arrival of the law. Kane's men threw down their guns in confusion. But Kane, consumed by a final desperate fury, saw only Serena Jane. With a guttural roar, he raised his derringer, ignoring the sheriff's command. "If I'm going to hang, you're coming with me." A single rifle shot, louder and sharper than the others, rang out from the shadows. Kane jerked violently, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. He staggered for a moment, his eyes wide with surprise, before collapsing into the dust. In the ensuing chaos, as Sheriff Brody and his men secured the area, Serena Jane looked toward the cottonwood trees. She saw Nache for a brief second. He gave her a single, solemn nod of acknowledgement. Then, before anyone in the posse could mark his position, he melted back into the night, vanishing as completely as a wisp of smoke. Sheriff Brody helped her to her feet. "It's over, Miss Mayfield." Serena Jane clutched the ledger, her knuckles white. She was safe. Justice would be served. But as she watched the impenetrable darkness that had swallowed her savior, she knew a part of her would forever be watching the high mesas, searching for the ghost who had called her name in the night. The story of Serena Jane Mayfield and the warrior Nache is more than just a tale of survival in the Old West. It's a testament to the fact that our greatest enemies are often the prejudices we hold within ourselves. Serena Jane's journey from blind hatred to a life-saving alliance reminds us that heroes and villains are not defined by the color of their skin or the people they belong to, but by the choices they make in the darkest of times. It's a story of courage, of challenging the convenient lies we are told, and of finding humanity in the most unexpected of places. The Wild West was not just a battle for land, but a battle for the very soul of the people who inhabited it. If this story of unlikely allies and frontier justice resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story with heart and grit. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales from the dusty trails of history. Your support helps us keep these incredible stories alive. Thank you for listening.